Listen to me, because this is the moment you stop chasing and you start winning, not with drama, not with revenge, but with peace. The avoidant doesn't break when you beg, they breathe, because your emotion becomes their excuse to stay distant. But when you walk away calmly, when you stop explaining, when you close the door without slamming it, something snaps inside their chest because they lose access without getting a fight to blame. And that silence, that clean absence, becomes the loudest message they've ever felt, and that's when their heart finally starts to feel you. When you walk away peacefully, something inside them loses its usual fuel, and I need you to understand what that fuel has been. It hasn't been love, it hasn't been connection, it hasn't even been the relationship itself. It's been the emotional noise, the chasing, the proving, the late-night messages trying to turn confusion into clarity, the repeated attempts to get through to someone who keeps stepping back the moment intimacy asks for consistency. Avoidant behavior is often a nervous system strategy, not a personality. It's the body saying too close feels unsafe, even when the heart secretly wants closeness. So when you stay in the cycle, when you keep reaching, keep negotiating, keep rescuing the connection alone, you unknowingly become the thing that allows them to avoid feeling. Because as long as you're providing intensity, they don't have to face the emptiness. As long as you're providing explanations, they don't have to face responsibility. And as long as you're providing emotion on demand, they don't have to sit with their own. Now imagine what happens when you stop. Not with anger, not with a dramatic exit designed to punish, but with calm, with dignity, with that quiet strength that says, I love you, but I will not abandon myself to keep you. That's the moment the avoidance nervous system doesn't know where to place you anymore, because you're not flooding them, and you're not begging them, and you're not performing pain to prove you cared. You're simply gone, peacefully. And peace is not something avoidance knows how to manage, because peace has no hooks, no triggers to chase, no drama to blame, no chaos to hide behind. Peace is a mirror, and a mirror is terrifying for someone who has spent their whole life learning to look away from their own feelings. At first, they may seem fine, even relieved, because the nervous system interprets your calm withdrawal as pressure leaving the room. No more talks, no more emotional intensity, no more expectation to show up fully. They breathe, they distract, they stay busy. They tell themselves it was inevitable, that you were too much, that relationships demand more than they can give. But here's the part nobody tells you. Relief is often just the first layer, and underneath it is the real thing they've been avoiding, the moment when silence becomes loud. Because when you stop feeding the dynamic, you also stop feeding their ability to numb out. Your absence removes the familiar structure that allowed them to stay halfway in without consequences. And slowly the space you leave behind starts to echo, not with your words, but with a question their heart can't outrun forever. Why did she leave so calmly? Because if you can leave calmly, it means you weren't trying to control them. It means you weren't trying to trap them. It means you weren't playing games. You were simply choosing yourself. And that's where the mirror begins to work on them. The avoidant is used to framing closeness as danger, used to telling themselves they withdraw because the other person is needy or demanding or too emotional. But your peaceful exit refuses to fit that story. You didn't explode, you didn't insult, you didn't chase them down for closure. You left with softness and strength, and that forces them to confront something uncomfortable, that the problem wasn't only the relationship, it was the fear of intimacy inside them. Your calm makes it harder to paint you as the villain, and when you can't villainize someone, you have to face yourself. That is the moment their heart feels a kind of pressure that isn't coming from you, it's coming from within. It's the pressure of reality, the pressure of consequence, the pressure of realizing that love can be lost without a war, and that might be the most sobering kind of loss, because it means nobody ruined it. It just slipped away while they were protecting themselves. Your silence becomes the loudest message they've ever received because it removes all the noise they relied on to stay emotionally distant. No more reassurance that you'll keep trying. No more proof that you'll accept crumbs. No more comfort of your presence while they remain half present. It's not that you're punishing them, it's that you're no longer cushioning their avoidance. And suddenly they notice the small things they never had to notice when you were still there. the empty space where your good morning used to land, the lack of warmth in the day, the absence of someone who cared in a steady way. They begin to feel the difference between being alone and being free. They used to confuse distance with safety, but now distance feels like emptiness because the person who brought softness into their life is no longer available. And that's when the avoidance heart starts to do something it resisted. It starts to attach after the fact, because attachment feels safer when the person is no longer demanding closeness in real time. And listen, this part matters because you might be tempted to interpret their pain as proof you won, or their reach out as proof your strategy worked. Don't. This isn't a game, and your worth is not measured by how much someone misses you once you're gone. What's happening in their heart is a delayed emotional experience, the grief that arrives late because they were too busy suppressing it earlier. They may feel it in waves. One day they're indifferent, the next day they're nostalgic, then defensive, then tender, then distant again. That inconsistency is not your responsibility to manage anymore. The only thing you need to know is this: your peaceful walking away forces the avoidant to face the one thing their nervous system hates most: the quiet truth. Quiet truth says, you can't keep love by avoiding it. Quiet truth says, you can't receive devotion while offering uncertainty. Quiet truth says, you can't ask someone to stay loyal to a moving target. And when the noise is gone, those truths begin to land. That is why walking away peacefully is so powerful, because it's not loud enough for them to argue with, and it's not cruel enough for them to blame. It simply exists, like a door that is closed without being slammed. A slammed door becomes a story about anger. A peaceful closed door becomes a story about consequence. And consequence touches the avoidant's heart in a way confrontation rarely does, because confrontation gives them something to resist, but consequence gives them something to feel. They may sit alone and finally realize that your love was not the trap, it was the invitation, and what scared them wasn't you, it was the possibility of being seen, of being needed, of being accountable. Your peace removes the battle, and when there is no battle, the avoidant finally hears the heartbeat underneath the armor, and in that quiet, they meet the part of themselves they've been running from, and for the first time, they can't outpace the silence. They can only sit with it. And that is where the mirror does its deepest work. And that is where your dignity becomes unforgettable. And that is where your absence stops being a tactic and becomes a turning point. And in that quiet, you remember your own name. You didn't walk away to punish them. You didn't walk away to make them panic. You didn't walk away to win. You walked away because something inside you finally whispered, quietly but clearly, I can't keep living like this. And that whisper matters, because it's not the voice of anger, it's the voice of self-respect. It's the voice that has been drowning under your fear of losing them, the voice that has been begging you to stop negotiating your worth, the voice that has been trying to pull you back from the edge of becoming someone you don't recognize. Walking away with dignity is not an attack, it's a rescue, and the person you rescue is you. For so long, you tried to love them in a way that made it easy for them to stay. You softened your needs, you edited your emotions, you rehearsed your words so they wouldn't feel pressured. You carried the weight of the relationship like it was your job to keep the connection alive. And in that process, you slowly learned a dangerous habit. You learned to abandon yourself. You learned to call crumbs effort. You learned to call silence space. You learned to call inconsistency busy. You learned to call emotional distance independence. And the most heartbreaking part is that you didn't do it because you were weak. You did it because you were loyal. You did it because you were hopeful. You did it because your heart kept believing that if you loved harder, they would finally feel safe enough to love you back. But self-respect eventually reaches a limit. It reaches a moment where it can't keep pretending, a moment where it stands up inside you and says, enough. Enough waiting for clarity that never comes. Enough trying to earn basic consideration. Enough being the only one who repairs what both of you break. Enough shrinking so someone else can feel comfortable. That moment isn't loud, it's sacred. It's a quiet decision to stop bleeding in silence. And when you walk away peacefully, you are not saying, you are bad. You are saying, this dynamic is not good for me. You are not declaring war, you are declaring a boundary. And that boundary is the moment you stop giving your life to a relationship that keeps asking you to disappear. Now, here's why this matters so much in an avoidant dynamic, because avoidants often don't respond to words the way you wish they would. You can explain until your throat is tired, you can communicate perfectly, you can cry softly, you can stay calm, you can do everything right, and still they may retreat. Because the problem isn't your wording, the problem is their nervous system, their fear of intimacy, their internal alarm that goes off when love starts feeling real. So your speeches, your paragraphs, your emotional openness, sometimes they don't create closeness, they create pressure. Not because you're wrong, but because they interpret vulnerability as danger. And that's why self-respect becomes your most powerful language. Because self-respect is not a debate. Self-respect is behavior. It's the one thing they can't talk you out of, the one thing they can't twist with logic, the one thing that doesn't require them to agree to be true. When you walk away peacefully, you send a message that is pure and undeniable. I am not available for uncertainty anymore. You show them that access to you is not automatic. It is earned through consistency. You show them that your heart is not a waiting room where they can come and go as they please. And an avoidant understands that kind of message, not because they love it, but because it creates a boundary they can feel. They might ignore your feelings, but they can't ignore your absence. They might dismiss your words, but they cannot dismiss the reality that you are no longer within reach. And that is what self-respect does. It turns your value into something real, something structural, something that cannot be negotiated down. But listen carefully. The biggest shift is not what happens in their heart. The biggest shift is what happens in yours. Because when you walk away with dignity, you stop outsourcing your worth to their behavior. You stop making your self-esteem depend on whether they text back. You stop measuring your value by whether they choose you. You stop living like love is a prize you have to win by being patient enough with pain. You reclaim yourself. And reclaiming yourself can feel like grief at first because you're not just losing them, you're losing the dream of who you hoped they would become. You're losing the fantasy of the day they finally wake up and show up. You're losing the version of the story where your devotion gets rewarded with consistency. That loss is real, and it deserves compassion, not self-judgment. But grief is not a sign you made the wrong choice. Grief is a sign you love deeply, and now you're choosing not to keep loving at the expense of your peace. And here's the part that is truly heart-touching. When you walk away peacefully, you become a living example of what healthy love looks like, even in goodbye. You show them that love can be kind and still have limits. You show them that someone can care and still walk away. You show them that intimacy doesn't have to be a battlefield, it can be a choice. And whether they grow from it or not, you stop participating in a dynamic that teaches you to settle. Because settling is a slow death. Settling is smiling while your needs starve. Settling is calling almost enough. And you were not made for almost. You were made for real love. Love that is consistent. Love that is safe. Love that doesn't require you to disappear. If they come back, your self-respect becomes the filter. Not their words, not their apologies, not their sudden intensity, but their consistency. Because your peaceful exit was not a performance, it was a standard. It was you saying, I will not return to the old terms. And that is where so many people fall. They leave, they feel strong, the avoidant returns with emotion, and they hand their power back because their heart is hungry. But you must remember, hunger is not discernment. Your heart can miss them and still choose what's healthy. Your heart can feel lonely and still refuse crumbs. Your heart can ache and still keep its boundary. That's maturity, that's strength, that's self-love. And if they don't come back, you still win, because you didn't lose yourself trying to hold on to someone who couldn't hold you. You didn't turn into a version of you that begs for basic care. You didn't let love become a place where you abandon your dignity. You walked away peacefully, and peace is not just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of self. It's waking up without the tightness in your chest. It's not checking your phone like it holds your worth. It's not walking on emotional eggshells. It's breathing again. It's finding your laughter again. It's remembering that you deserve a love that meets you, not a love you have to chase. So yes, something happens in the avoidance heart when you walk away peacefully, but something more important happens in yours. You stop pleading for love and you start embodying it. You stop auditioning and you start choosing. You stop calling pain connection and you start honoring peace as the highest form of love. And that is why walking away with dignity is not losing. It is becoming the person who never abandons themselves again. When you walk away peacefully, it doesn't feel like a punishment to them at first. It feels like a door quietly closing, and the sound is so soft that they don't even realize what they've lost until the air changes. Because what you remove isn't just your presence. You remove their access to you, the casual access, the convenient access, the I can disappear and she'll still be there access. And for an avoidant, that access has been the hidden safety net, the one thing that let them keep love close enough to feel wanted, but far enough to avoid feeling responsible. They may not say it like that, they may never admit it, but the truth is, they often stay in a relationship not because they're ready to be fully present, but because your presence is soothing, because your loyalty is predictable, because your warmth makes their world feel less empty, even when they refuse to meet you in the middle. So when you walk away with dignity, you introduce something their nervous system is not prepared for, a clean consequence. Not chaos, not screaming, not a dramatic scene they can replay and blame you for, but the quiet consequence of losing someone who didn't have to become cruel to protect themselves. That is what changes the entire dynamic. Because now they cannot treat your love like an unlimited resource. Now they cannot dip in and out without cost. Now they cannot vanish for days, return with a casual message, and expect you to reset like nothing happened. The moment you leave peacefully, the relationship stops being a comfortable place for them to regulate their emotions without doing the work. And that's why it hits so differently, because the loss is not only emotional, it's practical, it's structural. It's the removal of a privilege they didn't realize they were relying on. At first, they might test reality. They might reach out with something small, something that looks harmless, a hey, a meme, a reaction to your story, a check-in that pretends to be casual. Not because they suddenly became brave, but because they want to see if access still exists. They want to confirm whether the door is truly closed or whether you're still standing behind it waiting. And this is where your calm becomes your power. Because if you respond the old way, fast, emotional, available, you teach them that consequences are negotiable. But if you hold your peace, if you don't punish and you don't chase, if you stay kind and steady while staying unavailable to the old dynamic, something starts to happen inside them, a confusion that turns into craving, because they're faced with a version of you that doesn't bend, a version of you that doesn't collapse into fear, a version of you that doesn't offer love at a discount. And that's when the avoidant begins to feel something that looks like longing, but deeper than longing is the realization of loss, because they didn't just lose a person, they lost a pattern that protected them. They lost the ability to control closeness by controlling contact. They lost the ability to decide when intimacy happens by withdrawing and returning on their schedule. They lost the comfort of knowing you would be there even if they gave you uncertainty. And uncertainty was their currency. It allowed them to keep you hooked without having to fully commit. It allowed them to stay safe by staying vague. Your peaceful exit takes uncertainty off the table because your absence makes the situation clear, and clarity is the one thing avoidance hates because clarity demands a decision, and a decision demands risk. Now their heart begins to feel the weight of what their mind kept postponing. It's not always romantic at first. Sometimes it shows up as irritation. Why is she acting different? Sometimes it shows up as pride. I'm not reaching out again. Sometimes it shows up as distraction. I'll just move on. But beneath all of that is a softer truth. They miss the ease of you. They miss how you loved them without forcing them to face themselves. They miss the attention they could count on. They miss the emotional home you created while they stayed emotionally rented. And then comes the moment, the quiet moment they never planned for, when they realize you are no longer available for the role they assigned you, the role of the one who waits, the one who forgives quickly, the one who accepts inconsistency, the one who remains loyal to someone who remains undecided. And that realization can sting because it exposes the imbalance they were comfortable with. This is the part that is so hard for you because you loved them and you might want their pain to mean something. You might want it to be proof that they cared. But the most important thing to understand is that pain is not proof of change. Missing you is not the same as valuing you. Reaching out is not the same as showing up. And your peaceful walking away is not meant to turn them into a different person overnight. It's meant to protect your heart while revealing reality. It reveals whether they are capable of meeting you with consistency, whether they can tolerate intimacy without withdrawing, whether they can choose you without needing you to chase them into choosing. That's why your calm exit matters, because it stops you from doing emotional labor that hides their limitations. Still, the avoidance heart does feel something real when access is removed, because access allowed them to keep the illusion that they could have love without vulnerability. They could be wanted without being fully seen. They could be missed without being accountable. But when you walk away peacefully, you remove the illusion, and they are left with a cleaner truth. They had someone who cared deeply, and they did not protect that bond. They are left with the memory of you being steady, of you being kind, of you being present. And now your steadiness becomes the standard against which their other connections will be measured. Because not everyone will love them the way you did. Not everyone will be patient. Not everyone will offer warmth without demanding clarity. And that comparison can create a kind of ache because they realize that you were rare, and they treated rare like it was replaceable. The consequence also forces them to confront their own loneliness. Avoidants often appear independent, but independence can be a disguise for isolation. They don't always know how to reach for comfort in healthy ways. They may rely on routine, work, distractions, casual connections, but when the person who truly knew them is gone, the emptiness becomes more obvious. And this is where their heart can soften, not because you manipulated them, but because your absence makes them feel what they avoided feeling in the relationship, the vulnerability of needing someone. They begin to realize that closeness is not the enemy, inconsistency is. Love is not the trap, fear is. Commitment is not the cage, their coping strategy is. And whether they admit it or not, they may start to see that they didn't lose you because you were too much, they lost you because they kept offering too little. And I want you to remember this, because your heart needs protection here. The reason your peaceful exit has such impact is because it is clean. It's not a performance, it's not a threat, it's not a silent treatment. It's a boundary, and a boundary is simply the truth spoken through behavior. It says, I will not keep donating my love to a place where it is not respected. It says, I will not compete with your fear. It says, I will not be available on terms that break me. And the moment you live that truth, you become different. You become someone who cannot be kept through half effort. And that changes everything. Because now, if they want you, they have to meet you. Not chase you for a day, not miss you for a week, but meet you with consistency. And if they can't, then your peace becomes your closure. Because you didn't walk away to be chased, you walked away to be whole. And that wholeness is the love you were always meant to give yourself.